There is a moment, just before a hyena moves, when the savanna holds its breath. The grasses do not stir, the birds do not call, even the insects seem to pause, as if the land itself is aware that something ancient and precise is about to unfold. And then, without a single sound passing between them, without a gesture visible to any watching eye, 11 spotted hyenas begin to move. Not together, not obviously, not in any way that would alarm the lion sleeping less than 300 meters away, her belly full, her cubs tucked beside her, her kill still warm in the dust. Each hyena moves alone, separated by hundreds of meters of open ground, slipping through grass and scrub and dry riverbed, as if acting on individual impulse. But they are not acting alone. They never were. What you are about to witness is one of the most sophisticated feats of coordinated behavior ever recorded in a wild carnivore. A plan laid down over hours, across 3 square kilometers of African bushveld, executed without a single visible signal, and culminating in a takeover so perfectly timed that a lioness with a full belly and sharp teeth had no choice but to walk away from her own kill. If you want to understand how intelligent these animals truly are, stay with this. And if you have not yet subscribed, do it now, because what follows is going to change the way you think about the animals you thought you already understood. The story begins not at the moment of confrontation, but roughly 4 hours before it. It begins with a sound. At approximately 9 in the evening, somewhere in the darkness of the Klasri Private Nature Reserve in South Africa, a spotted hyena made a kill. Not a large kill. A young impala, perhaps 30 kilograms, enough for one animal eating alone, but not enough to satisfy the hunger of a clan. The kill was made quickly, the way hyenas prefer, with a sustained chase across open ground that ended in exactly the kind of efficient, unhesitating takedown that hyenas have been doing for millions of years. The hyena that made the kill was a mid-ranking female. She was not the most powerful animal in the clan, and she knew it. So before she had even finished opening the carcass, she did what hyenas do. She called. The whooping call of a spotted hyena travels extraordinary distances. In still night air, it can carry for 5 kilometers or more. It rises and falls in a series of notes that function not merely as a dinner bell, but as a complex burst of information. To a human ear, it sounds like laughter edged with panic. To another hyena, it is something far more structured. Identity, location, urgency, and context are all encoded in the variations of pitch and duration. Within minutes of the first call, answering whoops came back from across the dark landscape. The clan was assembling, but the clan was about to discover something that would change the nature of the evening entirely. Less than a kilometer from where the impala had been killed, a lioness had made a larger kill earlier that same night. A young wildebeest calf, perhaps 90 kilograms, more than twice the mass of the impala, richer in fat, more worth fighting for. The lioness had dragged it beneath a large shepherd's tree and had been eating steadily for 2 hours. Her 2 subadult cubs were with her. The 3 of them together were formidable. 3 lions, however young 2 of them were, represent serious fighting power. A single hyena approaching directly would be chased down and potentially killed. Even 3 or 4 hyenas rushing in together might be repelled if the lioness was feeling aggressive enough. The clan had a problem, and the clan solved it the way they always solve problems too complex for brute force. They thought their way around it. To understand what happened next requires a brief understanding of how hyena clans actually work, because almost everything popular culture has told you about hyenas is wrong. Hyenas are not cowardly scavengers lurking at the edges of lion territory hoping for scraps. They are highly organized social predators with cognitive abilities that rival, and in some specific domains exceed, those of many primates. A clan is not a mob. It is a structured society, with a clear matriarchal hierarchy, long-term social bonds, and what researchers have begun to describe as genuine political intelligence. The dominant female, the matriarch, does not lead every hunt by running at the front. She leads by making decisions that the whole group responds to, and those decisions are communicated in ways that we are only beginning to understand. In this particular clan, the matriarch was an 11-year-old female. Heavily scarred along her left shoulder from a previous encounter with lions, she had learned, the way hyenas learn, through direct experience compounded over years, that a single frontal assault on a feeding lion is a poor strategy. She had learned something else too, that lions, even multiple lions, have a threshold. A point at which the cost of defending a kill against a sufficiently large and distributed group of hyenas becomes greater than the benefit of keeping it. The key word there is distributed. A group of hyenas arriving together in a rush can be scattered by a charging lion. But a group of hyenas that arrives from multiple directions simultaneously, that materializes around the kill as if from nowhere, that gives the lion no single point of retreat and no single threat to charge at, that group is almost impossible to drive off. The matriarch had performed this maneuver before. She had also failed at it before, in her younger years, when the coordination was imperfect. She had the scars to prove it. She did not intend to fail this time. So here is what happened. Reconstructed from camera trap data, GPS collar records, and the direct field observations of two researchers from the Limpopo Carnivore Conservation Project, who were on site that night. Their account forms the backbone of what follows. At roughly 9:30, the 11 hyenas that would eventually participate in the takeover were spread across an area of just under 3 square kilometers. Some were still feeding on the impala kill. Some had been drawn in by the calls and were traveling toward the sound. The matriarch and 2 other senior females had moved to within 400 meters of the lion's tree and had gone to ground in a dry drainage line, a shallow sandy channel overhung with bush, invisible from the open ground above. They were not moving. They were waiting. And here is where it gets genuinely strange. For the next 90 minutes, almost nothing appeared to happen. The hyenas near the impala kill continued to eat. A few of the mid-ranking animals moved slowly and apparently aimlessly through the grass. One young male sat down in the open and seemed to go to sleep. To any observer not tracking their positions electronically, the scene would have looked completely static. 11 separate animals doing 11 separate, unrelated things. But the GPS data tells a different story. Over those 90 minutes, while appearing stationary or directionless, each of the 11 animals was in fact slowly and incrementally repositioning. The movements were small, 40 meters here, 60 meters there, a slow drift that individually meant nothing and collectively meant everything. Like the minute hand of a clock, each animal was rotating around the lion's position, spreading out, filling gaps in the arc around the tree, until, by 11 o'clock at night, the 11 hyenas formed a rough encirclement. Not complete, not obviously deliberate, but real. The average distance between adjacent animals in the arc was just under 120 meters. Each animal was positioned in a low point of the terrain, a dip, a drainage channel, a patch of dense grass, somewhere that provided concealment. None of them could see the others. But each of them was now in a position from which they could reach the lion's tree within approximately 45 seconds of beginning to move at full speed. The question that immediately presents itself, and that researchers have been grappling with ever since the data was first analyzed, is how. How did 11 animals spread across 3 square kilometers in the dark without any apparent visual coordination arrive at a distributed encirclement of a target they had never explicitly converged on together? The answer involves at minimum 3 separate mechanisms, and possibly a fourth that we do not yet have a name for. The first mechanism is acoustic mapping. Hyenas are extraordinarily good at using sound to build spatial models of their environment. They know, from calls alone, where every member of their clan is located, and they can update that model in real time as animals move and call. The whoops exchanged over those 90 minutes were not random. Analyzed by researchers using spectrographic equipment, they reveal a pattern of calls and responses that functioned like a slow-motion conversation about position. Each responding whoop came from a slightly different location than the last, marking the caller's movement through the landscape. A hyena processing this sequence of calls was not simply hearing noise, it was building a map, and on that map it could see, in the acoustic sense, where its companions were and where the gaps were. Moving to fill a gap in the encirclement required no explicit instruction. It required only that each animal understood the spatial logic of what the group was trying to achieve, and the evidence strongly suggests they did. The second mechanism is what researchers call role specialization. Not every hyena in a clan is used for every task. Over years of living together, individuals develop reputations for particular abilities. Some hyenas are reliable stalkers, capable of moving through cover at extremely low speed without breaking into exposed ground prematurely. Some are fast runners but poor stalkers, better deployed in positions where they will be required to sprint in quickly rather than hold still for extended periods. Some are better fighters. Some are better at harassment, at making enough noise and motion to disorient a defending predator without engaging directly. On the night in question, the three animals placed closest to the lion's direct line of retreat, the positions most likely to require a direct confrontation if the lioness chose to flee that way rather than simply abandon the kill, were all senior females. The animals placed farthest from the kill, in positions that would allow them to sweep in from the flanks at speed once the confrontation began, were younger and faster. This is not random. This is assignment. How that assignment was communicated across 3 kilometers of dark bushveld to 11 animals who could not see each other is something we cannot fully explain. But the result was unambiguous. The third mechanism is something researchers have tentatively labeled anticipatory spatial logic, though the plain description is perhaps more striking than the technical term. It means simply this: hyenas appear to be able to model, in their minds, where a predator is likely to move if startled, and to position themselves in that projected path in advance of the disturbance. This is not reflex. It is prediction. It requires the hyena to hold in working memory a representation of the lion's current position, the layout of the terrain, the likely directions of flight, and the positions of its own companions, and to integrate all of those into a decision about where to go before anything has happened. This is, by any reasonable definition, planning, and planning of this spatial complexity has until recently been considered the exclusive province of humans, and perhaps a handful of other great apes. The fourth mechanism, the one without a name yet, is harder to describe, but may be the most important of all. There are moments in the GPS data from that night where animals change direction in ways that cannot be explained by acoustic cues, because no calls were recorded at the relevant time, and cannot be explained by visual contact, because the terrain prevented it, and cannot be explained by scent, because the wind direction rules it out. They simply turned, at the right moment, toward the right position. Some researchers are reluctant to speculate about what this implies. Others are not. What it may imply is that in a clan that has hunted together for years, in a group of animals that have shared food and raised young and fought side by side and slept against one another for an entire lifetime, there is a quality of mutual understanding that has become something close to instinct. Not instinct in the genetic sense. Instinct in the sense of deeply internalized knowledge of each other. The hyenas may know their companions well enough, and know the task well enough, that the coordination emerges not from communication, but from a shared model of the world, that each animal has independently constructed, and that, because they have built it together through shared experience, turns out to be the same. This is speculative, but it is not idle speculation. It is the direction that the best science on hyena cognition is now pointing. At 11:17, the matriarch moved. She rose from the drainage line in complete silence, at a walking pace, in a straight line toward the shepherd's tree. She did not whoop, she did not rush. She walked with a steadiness that was, depending on your interpretation, either completely calm or something more like cold intention. She was still more than 300 meters from the tree. The lioness, lying beside her kill, raised her head. What the lioness saw was a single hyena approaching from the northwest. Annoying, but manageable. She stood up. She laid her ears back. She gave the low warning rumble that lions use to communicate serious displeasure. One of her subadult cubs, a male, rose alongside her. The other stayed down near the kill. The matriarch kept walking. Then, at 11:19, the second hyena appeared. It came from the east, from behind a low termite mound, at a trot. Then a third, from the southeast. Then, within 40 seconds of one another, 4 more, from directions spread almost evenly around the tree. They did not rush. None of them ran. They moved with a measured, unhurried purpose that was somehow more disturbing than a charge would have been, because running can be stopped. This slow, distributed materialization from every direction could not. The lioness turned north. There were hyenas in the north. She turned south. Hyenas in the south. She made a short charge at the nearest animal, the young female who had come in from the southeast. The hyena turned and retreated exactly far enough to draw the lioness away from the kill, then stopped. Another hyena, from behind the lioness, took a step toward the carcass. The lioness spun around. The southeast hyena stepped back in. This exchange, described in detail in the field notes from that night, is not new behavior. It is a pattern that researchers have observed many times in hyena-lion interactions at kills. What makes this particular instance exceptional is the precision of its execution. The hyena that stepped toward the carcass when the lioness turned away was not the nearest animal. It was not the most dominant animal, It was a mid-ranking female positioned to the south, who had, in the GPS data, been the last animal to reach her position in the encirclement. She had been, in effect, waiting for exactly this moment, the moment when the lioness's attention was drawn north, opening a gap. The timing required that she know the lioness had charged north. From her position, in the dark, she could not have seen it. She might have heard it, a brief disturbance in the night sounds. She might have read the posture of a companion who could see the charge. Or she might, as the researchers who documented the incident cautiously suggest, have anticipated it. Might have known, from the logic of the encirclement, that the matriarch's approach from the north would eventually produce exactly this northward charge, and have been ready for it. The lioness held for approximately 4 more minutes. Her cubs were now both on their feet, pressed against her. She made 2 more charges, each one drawing her slightly farther from the carcass, each one answered by the same neat withdrawal that refused to escalate to a fight while refusing equally to retreat. And then, in the way that lions sometimes do when the arithmetic of a situation becomes undeniable, she simply stopped. She stood for a moment looking at the kill, and then at the hyenas, and then at the kill again. Then she walked away, her cubs following. She moved northwest at a steady walk, not running, maintaining a dignity that was entirely functional. A running lion tells predators it is afraid, and a feared predator does not stay feared for long. She disappeared into the darkness. The hyenas were on the carcass within seconds. The matriarch ate first. The senior females ate alongside her. The younger animals and the males fed at the edges. The whole thing was orderly, in the way that hyena feeding always is. Noisy, chaotic looking to the untrained eye, but actually quite precisely governed by the social hierarchy that permeates every aspect of clan life. Within 20 minutes, very little remained. To many people watching that sequence of events, the instinct is to search for an explanation that does not require intelligence. We are, as a species, deeply resistant to attributing complex cognitive abilities to animals we have historically dismissed. And hyenas have been dismissed more thoroughly than almost any other large predator. The laughing scavenger, the coward of the savannah, the animal that steals from real hunters and runs from real fighters. This reputation is so pervasive, so embedded in wildlife documentary tradition and folk knowledge, and even scientific literature, that it has genuinely impeded the study of what hyenas actually are. Because what hyenas actually are is something altogether more demanding of our respect. Let us be clear about the scavenger question first, because it keeps coming up and it keeps being wrong. Studies using GPS tracking and direct observation across multiple African ecosystems have consistently shown that spotted hyenas kill the majority of the food they eat. In the Serengeti, they kill approximately 70% of what they consume. In Kruger, the figure is similar. In some areas, the relationship is actually inverted from the popular image. Lions scavenge from hyenas more frequently than hyenas scavenge from lions. Lions have the size and the teeth and the fearsome reputation, and they use all three to steal food from an animal that worked to obtain it. The hyena's habit of approaching lion kills is not timid opportunism, it is the rational attempt to recover stolen property. The fact that hyenas sometimes fail to recover it, that lions sometimes win the standoff, does not change the underlying dynamic. It merely reflects the physical reality that a lion is, in direct one-on-one confrontation, larger and more dangerous than a hyena. The solution to that problem, the solution hyenas evolved over millions of years, is not to become individually more dangerous. It is to become collectively more intelligent. Because numbers alone do not explain what happened that night in the classerie. Numbers would explain a direct charge. 11 animals against 3, with weight of numbers advantage, could simply have rushed in together and driven the lions off through sheer volume of threat. Hyenas do sometimes operate this way, but this night they did not. This night, they used something more sophisticated. They used space. The use of three-dimensional space as a tactical variable, the deliberate positioning of allies at geometrically meaningful points across a landscape in order to create an encirclement that removes a target's options, is a form of tactical reasoning that military strategists have formalized and written about for thousands of years. It is what Hannibal did at Cannae. It is what countless generals have attempted in countless battles, with varying degrees of success, across recorded history. The principle is always the same. Do not simply outnumber an opponent. Surround them. Remove their lines of retreat. Force them to fight on your terms or not fight at all. The hyenas that night were not doing something analogous to this. They were doing exactly this, with the same underlying logic, applied to a different scale and a different context. The fact that they were doing it without maps, without language as we define it, without any of the explicit planning tools that human tacticians have available, makes it not less impressive. It makes it considerably more impressive. The matriarch of this clan had, at the time these events were recorded, lived for 11 years. In those 11 years, she had participated in dozens, possibly hundreds of confrontations with lions. She had learned which tactics worked and which did not. She had watched other senior females use the encirclement strategy and had helped execute it. She had also, researchers believe, been actively instrumental in teaching younger clan members the strategy, not through explicit instruction, the way a human teacher would, but through the model of her own behavior, through the consistent demonstration over years of the same spatial logic. The younger animals in the clan had grown up watching the matriarch position herself in drainage lines, watching her send the group wide before closing in. They had learned, as social learners always learn, by observing competence and reproducing it. This is cultural transmission. The passing of learned behavior between individuals through observation and social interaction, rather than through genetic inheritance. It is a phenomenon once thought to be uniquely, or at least predominantly, human. We know now that it is not. We have documented it in chimpanzees and dolphins and crows and elephants. We are, increasingly, documenting it in hyenas, and the implications of that documentation are worth sitting with for a moment. If the encirclement strategy used that night in the clazery is a culturally transmitted behavior, then it has a history. Someone first invented it, or first arrived at it through trial and error, at some point in the past. That innovation then spread through the clan, and possibly through contact between clans, through exactly the same mechanism by which human innovations spread. One individual sees another doing something that works, and learns to do it too. The clan that executed the strategy that night is not, in this sense, just a group of animals. It is a society with a tradition, with knowledge that has been built up over generations and passed forward through time, modified and refined by each new generation's experience. That is not so very different from what we are. But let us come back to the night itself, because the encirclement and the takeover are only part of the story. What happened in the hours after the kill is, in some ways, even more revealing. After the hyenas finished feeding, the clan did not simply disperse. The matriarch and 3 other senior females remained at the site of the kill for an extended period, performing a behavior that researchers have variously described as sentinel activity or perimeter maintenance. They moved in a slow circuit around the area where the carcass had been, pausing at intervals to scent mark, to scan the darkness, to listen. The GPS data shows them moving in overlapping arcs, covering the ground around the kill site in a pattern that was, again, distributed rather than clustered. They were not simply digesting, they were watching. And what they were watching for was the lioness. Because lions do come back. A lioness who has walked away from a stolen kill does not necessarily accept the loss as permanent. Sometimes, particularly if the cubs are hungry and the night is still young enough to offer options, she will circle back. She will approach from a different direction. She will test whether the hyenas are still there, still alert, still numerous. If she finds them scattered and inattentive, she may try again. The post-kill vigil is the clan's insurance against this. It is the maintenance of an advantage already won, the recognition that winning a confrontation is not the same as securing the resource. This is not instinct in any simple sense. It is the kind of sustained, future-oriented attentiveness that requires holding in mind the possibility of a threat that has not yet materialized. It requires, in other words, thinking about what might happen rather than simply reacting to what is happening. The lioness did, in fact, come back. At 12:43 in the morning, her GPS collar placed her 380 meters northeast of the kill site, moving southwest. She was approaching. The matriarch, still on her perimeter circuit, made a single call, not a full whoop. The researchers describe it as a low-pitched tonal grunt, a sound that hyenas use in close-range communication and that is far less audible to distant animals than a full whoop. The 3 other senior females immediately converged on the matriarch's position. They formed a loose group of 4, facing northeast, in silence. The lioness stopped. Her GPS track shows her stationary for 11 minutes at 380 meters. Then she turned. She moved northeast, away from the kill site, and did not return that night. What stopped her is unknowable with certainty. She may have heard the grunt and calculated that the clan was still present. She may have scented them. She may simply have decided, on whatever basis a lion makes such decisions, that the cost of another confrontation was not worth it. But it is worth noting what the four hyenas did. They did not make a display. They did not charge. They did not whoop and make themselves seem more numerous than they were. They gathered, quietly, in a position that would have placed them directly between the approaching lioness and the remains of the kill, and they waited. If the lion had kept coming, she would have found not a scattered and distracted group of feeding animals, but four alert, positioned, prepared animals standing their ground. She seems to have understood this, or something like it, before she arrived. There is a long tradition in wildlife filmmaking and nature writing of describing animal behavior in purely mechanistic terms, of being careful never to attribute intention or understanding or anything that sounds too much like thought to the animals we are observing. This tradition comes from a good place. It comes from the historical abuse of anthropomorphism, from centuries of projecting human emotions and motivations onto animals in ways that distorted rather than illuminated their actual nature. The corrective to that abuse was a rigorous insistence on mechanistic description, on explaining behavior in terms of stimulus and response, of instinct and conditioning, without reference to anything that sounded like inner experience. That corrective was useful, but like most correctives, it overshot. And we are now in a period of recalibration, in which the evidence is forcing us to take seriously the possibility that some animals have inner lives that are more complex, more intentional, more genuinely mind-like than the strictly mechanistic framework allows for. Hyenas are at the center of that recalibration. The cognitive research on spotted hyenas conducted over the last 2 decades has produced results that continue to surprise even the scientists conducting it. In tests designed to probe social intelligence, specifically the ability to understand the mental states of others and to reason about relationships between third parties, hyenas have performed at a level comparable to chimpanzees. Not similar to chimpanzees, comparable to chimpanzees. They understand that when animal A is dominant over animal B and animal B is dominant over animal C, animal A is also dominant over animal C. They can make inferences about relationships they have not directly observed by reasoning about the relationships they have. They show what researchers call triadic awareness. They think about the social world not as a collection of dyadic pairs, but as a network, a set of relationships between others that they can model and navigate. This is, by any rigorous definition, a sophisticated form of intelligence. And it does not live in isolation. It lives alongside everything else we have described tonight. The acoustic mapping, the spatial reasoning, the coordinated positioning across kilometers of dark landscape, the post-kill vigil, the reading of a distant predator's intention before she arrived. All of these things belong to the same animal that popular culture calls a scavenger and a coward, the same animal whose laugh has been used for a century as shorthand for treachery and foolishness in stories and films and folklore. The gap between that reputation and this reality is one of the largest and most instructive gaps in our understanding of the natural world, and the people doing the most to close it are researchers who go out into the field night after night, in the dark and the heat and the dust, and watch. In the Limpopo, in the Masai Mara, in the Ngorongoro crater, where one of the longest and most detailed studies of spotted hyena behavior has been running for more than 4 decades. In Namibia and Botswana and Zambia and across the broad swathe of sub-Saharan Africa, where spotted hyenas still live in numbers large enough to study. In all of these places, the same picture emerges, not uniformly and not in every detail, because hyenas are not automatons and populations differ and individuals differ, but the core of it is consistent. These are animals that think, that learn, that plan, that coordinate, that remember, that teach. These are animals with cultures and traditions and politics. These are animals that face the challenges of survival not with raw power, but with collective intelligence, and that have been doing so successfully for millions of years. The spotted hyena has been on this earth in something close to its current form for approximately 3 million years. Homo sapiens has been here for roughly 300,000. The hyena has us beat by an order of magnitude. In all that time, across all that change, through ice ages and the rise and fall of competitors and the transformation of landscapes, the spotted hyena has maintained itself as one of Africa's dominant large predators, not by being the strongest, or the fastest, or the most individually formidable, but by being smarter together than anything else is apart. That is not an accident of evolution. That is a strategy. And it works. There is something in the image of those 11 animals, spreading silently across 3 square kilometers of dark African night, that repays long contemplation. Not because it is dramatic, though it is. Not because it is tactically clever, though it absolutely is, but because it is evidence of something we are still reluctant to fully accept, that the capacity for coordinated, intelligent, collectively reasoned action is not the exclusive property of our species. That out there, in the darkness, in the grasslands, and the drainage lines, and the shadow of the shepherd's trees, minds are at work, different from ours, shaped by different pressures, expressed through different channels, but working, planning, anticipating, teaching each other and learning from each other and building over generations a body of knowledge about how the world is and how to move through it. When the matriarch rose from that drainage line and walked toward the lion in the dark, she was not acting on reflex. She was not following an instinctive program. She was executing a plan that her clan had been building for 90 minutes, that she had refined through years of experience, that her predecessors had developed before her, and that she would pass on to the young females watching her that night. She was doing what any competent leader does when the moment finally arrives, trusting the preparation, walking forward, and waiting for the rest to fall into place. And it did. The way it always does when the plan is good, and the team is ready, and everyone knows their role without being told. The lioness walked away. The carcass changed hands. The clan fed, and somewhere in the darkness, 11 spotted hyenas dispersed back across 3 square kilometers of African bush, already beginning, in whatever way hyenas begin such things, to carry the memory of what they had done together into whatever came next. The grasslands of Africa have been the stage for animal dramas of extraordinary complexity for longer than our species has existed. We have watched them, filmed them, studied them, and in many cases still managed to fundamentally misunderstand them. The hyena is perhaps the most misunderstood of all, not because the evidence is lacking. It is not lacking. It has been accumulating for decades, in journals and field reports and the painstaking data sets of researchers who have dedicated their professional lives to watching these animals in the dark. The misunderstanding persists because it is easier, and perhaps more comfortable, to see the laughing scavenger than to see the tactician. Because the tactician asks something of us that the scavenger does not. It asks us to revise what we thought we knew, to sit with complexity, to admit that intelligence, in whatever form it takes, is not ours alone. The hyenas of the Klaserie did not need our recognition that night. They did not need us to understand